Okay, what we're going to do today is we're going to go through some examples of how to read the psychometrics chart. So the best thing to do is to give you an example and we'll jump right in. Okay, so for the example one, we're going to do two examples. The first one, I'm going to give you a room condition of 75 degrees dry bulb and 50% relative humidity. These are ideal ideal room conditions. We want to find the following values. We want to find the wet bulb, humidity ratio, enthalpy, dew point, specific volume, vapor pressure, and percentage relative humidity. So the first step that we need to do is we need to get a copy of the psychometric chart and we need to mark our point. So if we were actually using a paper copy, we would trace out where we are and put a mark. Now what I've done here, now you'll see on this picture what I've done is I've gone ahead and marked the point for you. So there's a really nice tool that's in PowerPoint. You can do that. You can go to draw and then you can choose a pen, whichever color you want. And you can change the color if you like. That way you can get something that's a little easy to see. So I go down the x-axis. You can see that this is the dry bulb temperature. I go over to 75. And I basically go up until I hit the 50% curve and I just drew a little dot, a mark there. And that's going to allow me to have something to use to do measurements. Okay, once you're finished with that, you got to remember to hit the select over on the side and go back to home. That way you can actually look and read and then manipulate yourself through the different values there. So the first thing that we are going to look at is going to be the wet bulb temperature. The wet bulb temperature is located along this curve. You can see those lines right there. And these angled lines that have a gentle slope are going to help us read that value. So if we take a look at this point and we trace up, we get a temperature that's about 62.6 degrees. You can see that it's right there in between the 62 and the 63. So what we'll do is we'll go on the next slide and then we'll just go ahead and keep track of that. You guys would write that down in your notes, but we're just going to go ahead and type it here. Okay, going back to the picture, the next thing we need to find is the humidity ratio. Now the humidity ratio is pretty easy to read. It's over here on the right side. It's the first set of numbers. I'm going to trace over parallel to the x-axis, and I'm going to go ahead and take my reading. We're going to have to estimate this a little bit, so I'll be flexible with the numbers. But if we trace over, we'll see we get a reading about 65 degrees. Okay, so I'll go ahead and go back to this here and type in 65 degrees for us. Okay, the next thing is enthalpy. Now this is a little bit more challenging to read. What we have to do here is you see these numbers, enthalpy is located in a couple of places. Enthalpy is located here outside of the wet bulb curve, and it's also located down here at the bottom and up on the right side. Okay, so what we're going to do, if we actually had a printed copy of this, we would get a ruler and line up the 25 and the 25 and then just move the ruler up like a rolling ruler until we get a line that's parallel. Now what we can do in PowerPoint is something very easy. We can actually just draw a line. We can match up our 25 here with our 25 down there. And I'm going to go ahead and make this line a little bit thicker. That way it's easier for me to see. Okay, I can change the weight. I'm going to change it till it's right about there. And then all I really need to do is I need to basically take this line and move it so it passes through that point that we drew. Okay, now you can see I moved my line a little bit higher, so I'm going to have to be a little bit flexible with my numbers there. If I go ahead and take the reading of about where it should be, I should get about a 28.1. So we'll go ahead and write down 28.1 for our enthalpy. That's a nice little tool in PowerPoint that'll help us read that. The next is the dew point temperature. Okay, so let's go back, and we don't really need this line anymore, so I'm going to go ahead and delete it. Now the dew point temperature is also on the vertical side, and I can trace along, okay, and get the dew point temperature here. If I take a reading, okay, I should get a reading of about 55 degrees. So I'm going to go ahead and write that on this slide here, just to keep track of everything that I have. Okay. The next one is specific volume. Now, before we jump into specific volume, we're going to have to use another skill called interpolation. Okay. So I'm going to go ahead and jump back to this PowerPoint here. Just like we have extrapolation, we're predicting some values outside of data that we have. With interpolation, we're predicting values inside of data that we have. We can use this for relative humidity and specific volume. We're going to use it for specific volume. It's the distance between basically the points, or sorry, the values, and we got to take a couple of measurements to do that. Okay, so I'll go ahead and go to the example. That way it's a little bit easier to see. So if you take a look at this, let's say we're doing specific volume, which we are. We would take a measurement between these two lines. We have to take a perpendicular measurement because that's going to be the shortest distance between those two lines. Okay, when we would write that down. And then we would take a measurement here of where our red point is to the smaller line. Okay, and then we would take a ratio. We would take this distance divided by this distance, and we can say that, let's say that this is 1 inch, and let's say that that's probably about 0.4 inches. Okay, it's not quite 0.5, so I'm going to say it's 0.4. It would be 0.4. And since there's a difference of 0.1 between, we would take 0.1 times 0.4, and that would give us 0.04, and then we would add that to this value, the 13.5, and that would be 13.54. So I hope that makes sense. You might need to rewind that and take a look at that. So let's go back and look at our example here and see where we are. If we take a look at where our red dot is, our red dot is between the 13.6 curve and the 13.7 curve. Now with this, I'm going to have to estimate the percent. So I'm going to say that that's probably about 75%. Okay, so it's about 75%, or we'll say 70% to make it a little bit easier. Okay, so the distance between these green steep lines is always going to be 0.1. So if I take 0.1 times 0.7, I'll get 0.07. So that means my specific volume is going to be 13.67. So I'm going to go ahead and write that down, 13.67. Okay. The vapor pressure is pretty easy. It's the next thing we're going to read. And again, the vapor pressure is right here on the vertical side. It's the outside vertical value. So what we're going to do is we're going to basically just trace over until we get a reading. Okay, we trace over and we're going to get something right about 0.44. It might be good to draw a line if you're in PowerPoint. That'll help you line it up a little bit easier. Okay. Or you can just try to use your mouse to go straight ahead and get your reading. So we're going to go ahead and write that value down on this here, 0.44. Okay, now our percentage relative humidity, we don't need to interpolate that here because we're right on the 50% curve. So we're just going to mark that 50%. Okay, so that's the first example. The second example that we have is I'm going to give you air at 83 dry bulb and 60 degree wet bulb. We need to find enthalpy, humidity ratio, dew point, and relative humidity. So again, the first step in doing these estimations is to go ahead and mark your point. Okay, and this is supposed to say example 2, not example 1. I apologize about that. Okay, so if you go ahead and zoom in, you'll see that what I've done is I've gone ahead and marked the point. I've gone over to 83, and you can see that this line, this green line right here, is the 60 degrees wet bulb, and I've gone ahead and drawn the red dot where the intersection occurs. Okay, so the first thing I need to read, we take a look at our list, is their enthalpy. So what we are going to do is we're going to go ahead and use the insert tools. We're going to insert the shape. Again, I like to insert the lines. Okay, and I'm going to match up my 25 here with my 25 there. It's a little hard to see that, so I'm going to go ahead and make it a little bit thicker. so it's easier to see. So I'm going to change the weight, not the compound type, but the weight. Make it a little bit thicker and easy to see. And then what I can do is I can drag that line, okay, until it basically lines up with that point. And I take my reading for my enthalpy, and I'm going to get about a 26.2 reading, okay? So I'm going to go ahead and write that down, okay? Humidity ratio, if I go back to the previous slide, okay, the humidity ratio is over here. I'm going to go ahead and delete this curve since I don't need it anymore. For the humidity ratio, I'm going to go over horizontally and get that value, trace over, okay? And I'm going to get about 40.5. So I'm going to go ahead and type that in here for my 40.5, okay? Now the dew point temperature is next. That's pretty straightforward. Again, that's tracing over to the side to the next numbers here. If I trace over to that, okay, the dew point temperature, I'll zoom in a little bit more. That way it's easier for me to see, and I'm looking at this scale right here. I trace over, and you'll see that I get about a 43 degrees, okay? So I'm going to go ahead and type in that value here. Okay, now the last thing is my relative humidity. Now this is going to involve the interpolation. So if we take a look at this, we'll see that our relative humidity is between 20% and between 30%. So if I go back to that other PowerPoint real quick with the examples here, you can see that I'm going to do something very similar. I'm going to take a couple readings. Now, with us, since we don't have a printed copy, we have to estimate there. So we have to estimate when we're interpolating. So we have to figure out how much of a percentage this blue line is versus between the two purple dots. So for here, for this picture, I would say that that's probably about 60%. So this would be about 46. But if I go to our example here, and we zoom in, I would say that that's probably, it's not quite half, but it would probably be closer to 4. So I would say that that would be 40%. So that would be 0.4 times 10%, that would be 0.04, which would give us a value of 24%. So we'll put that down to conclude our example. Okay, so that would be 24%. So hopefully that helps you with reading the psychrometric chart a little bit easier. Feel free to go back and rewatch the video as needed.